In the history of human warfare, no warrior has been more celebrated or mythologized than the Spartan soldier. He has stood for millennia as a symbol of unbreakable will and discipline, as a consummate professional whom no hardship could force to betray his loyalty to his comrades or his own personal honor. Frequently, they're depicted in almost cartoonish fashion, as supermen obsessed with war, unbeatable in even combat. The reality is a good deal more complex, but the fact is that Sparta at its prime was an extremely formidable opponent. For a period of more than 150 years, from the 6th to the 4th century BC, no Spartan field army lost a pitched battle, a remarkable battlefield record. For their contemporaries whom they fought against, the Spartans were the epitome of soldierly virtue. How are these soldiers formed? How are they equipped? And how did they fight? A Spartan boy's training began at the age of 7 upon his induction into the famous Agoge, the state-mandated educational curriculum for all male citizens. Although the popular image of Spartans is as a bloody-minded, war-obsessed killing machine, in reality the Agoge sought to turn young boys into well-rounded, fully formed Spartan citizens. They learned reading and writing, poetry and dancing, hunting and athletics, all the skills befitting the landed gentry they were. All of this was typical of the education of well-born Greeks in other city-states as well. However, the Spartan vision of manly virtue required more than cultural accomplishments. The Agoge sought to make Spartan boys extremely tough, capable of bearing hardship and fending for themselves. According to Xenophon, an Athenian soldier and writer whose sons were permitted to attend the Agoge, they were fed just the right amount for them to never become sluggish through being too full, while also giving them a taste of what is not to have enough. Boys were encouraged to steal more food for themselves whenever they could find it. If they were caught, they were brutally whipped to punish them. Not for the theft, but for their clumsiness in allowing themselves to be detected. They slept on beds of reeds pulled from the river with their bare hands, and were given only one new article of clothing each year in the form of a red cloak. They were not only permitted to fight each other, but encouraged to challenge one another to personal combat. The boys were expected to develop a contempt for hardship and suffering, and this mental and physical toughness would serve them well on the campaign. At the age of 18, a Spartan boy became a reserve member of the army, and at 20 he sought to be inducted into one of the public messes, the compulsory communal social and dining groups. He had 10 years in which to try, and only on admittance did he become a full citizen and a regular soldier. Those who failed to be accepted in this time were doomed to only partial citizenship and a life of disgrace. A full Spartan citizen soldier was a heavy infantryman and was equipped as a hoplite, just as the heavy infantry of other Greek city-states. Citizens did not serve as light infantry, and Sparta had to rely on allies and mercenaries to provide cavalry. Hoplites were so called for the large circular shield they carried, the hoplon. Initially constructed of wood, the Spartans began encasing the outsides of their shield in bronze in the 5th century BC. To make them more robust, it was a large, heavy piece of equipment that was essential not only to the safety of the individual soldier, but to that of the man next to him as well. Each man's shield protected the left side of his body, but the right side was protected by the shield of the man adjacent to him in the formation. The shield was also an important symbol of a soldier's courage. If a soldier turned to flee the field of battle, the heavy, cumbersome shield was often one of the first things he jettisoned to enable him to make his escape. Dropping the shield became a synonym for desertion, which would brand any man as a coward. Spartan mothers were supposed to have handed their sons their shields before they left on campaign, with the admonition that they came back with it or on it. In other words, the only options for an honorable man were to carry his shield back successfully, showing that he never broke ranks and fled from battle like a coward, or to be carried on it as a corpse by his comrades. Nothing in between. In the Archaic period, Spartan soldiers wore a bronze cuirass to protect their torsos, but eventually transitioned to the linothorax, a lightweight type of armor made up of layers of linen held together with animal-based glue. It might sound like an unlikely material for armor, but modern reconstructions have shown that the linothorax can offer significant protection against enemy arrows and the slashing attacks of swords. It would not have offered the level of protection bronze did, but it was cheaper, cooler, and importantly much lighter. In the physically demanding environment of battle, men would quickly become exhausted, and weight had to be saved where it could. The soldier would have been further protected by bronze greaves to guard his lower legs and a bronze helmet. The most iconic image of the Spartan warrior has him wielding a Corinthian-style helmet, which covered most of his face, with its distinctive angular eye slits and nose and cheek guards. A bright crest of horsehair was worn on top, making the wearer appear larger and more intimidating. Over time, however, the helmets of Spartan soldiers evolved, and later generations wore the Pylos-style helmet, which was shaped like a rounded cone. The Pylos didn't protect the wearer as completely, but it was lighter weight and allowed the wearer a greater field of vision and better hearing, an important feature in the roaring chaos of battle. The Spartan hoplite's main weapon was the dory, a single-handed spear ranging from around 7 to 10 feet in length, made of cornel or ash wood, with an iron spearhead at the top and an iron butt spike at the bottom to balance the weapon. The bottom spike could be used to anchor the spear in the ground and even to kill wounded enemy soldiers lying on the ground as the formation moved over them. The spear was essential to the Greek style of fighting, allowing a soldier to strike out at an enemy while maintaining his place in a tight formation, and for multiple ranks of men in the formation to fight. Each soldier would also carry a javelin to throw at the enemy and a short sword called a chiphos. It was to be expected that as the two battle lines closed on each other and the fighting began, many spears would be broken in combat or unusable at close quarters. Then the soldier could draw his sword to continue the fight. The Spartan short sword was noted to be considerably shorter than those carried by the soldiers of other Greek states, which might have made them more useful in the close press of battle, where there would be no room to wield a longer blade. In one story, a Spartan mother, hearing her son complaining that his sword was too short, admonished him to step a foot closer to the enemy and it'll be long enough. Each man wore a red cloak called a himation, and a formation of Spartan soldiers would have presented an uncommonly unified appearance compared to their contemporaries. By the late 5th century BC, the Spartans were painting their shields with the famous lambda symbol, the Greek letter L, which stood for the proper name of the Spartan state as a whole, Lacedaemon. In other Greek armies, a soldier's shield would have been painted with the design of his own choice. Xenophon described the Spartans' appearance on the field of battle as a single mass of bronze and red. The Spartan infantry fought in the same manner as that of other Greek city-states, in the hoplite phalanx. The phalanx was a dense formation of spearmen positioned so closely together that each man's shield overlapped the right side of the man next to him, with the spears of the first few ranks projecting forward. The result was a solid block of men, extremely strong and resistant to breaches by the enemy, bristling with spears all along its front. Men behind the front rank could add their force to the advance by pushing on the man in front of them, creating a terrible momentum that made the phalanx extremely difficult to stop or break. When warring Greek city-states met on a field of battle, the opposing phalanxes would line up opposite one another and advance to contact. They would thrust, stab, hack, and push until one side's formation came apart or the men lost their nerve and broke. If one side's phalanx maintained its courage, discipline, and cohesion longer than the other, they could drive the enemy before them, giving them no choice but to retreat. Then cavalry could ride them down and slaughter the fleeing soldiers. The phalanx did, however, have serious weaknesses. First and foremost, it was an extremely slow and cumbersome formation. The strength of the phalanx relied on the soldiers remaining closely packed together, which meant that it had to advance very slowly. Phalanxes had a notable tendency to drift to the right as they moved forward, as each man sought to remain in the protection of the shield of his neighbor. Rough terrain could cause dangerous gaps to open up in the formation, and so hoplite armies tended to choose flat, open terrain for battle. Even more importantly, the phalanx was inflexible and difficult to control, with thousands of men packed into a tight group, each man relying on the proximity of his neighbor for protection and trying to never open up a gap for the enemy to exploit. It could not maneuver easily. Once the opposing phalanxes were lined up for battle, it was extremely difficult to do anything but move straight forward. The armies of the Greek city-states were not made up of what we would think of today as professional soldiers. These were not men who made a career fighting, but citizens called away from their normal lives to serve for a brief time against a particular enemy. Most Greek armies did not practice formation drills, which meant that complicated maneuvers on the battlefield were simply beyond their capabilities. The Spartans were an exception. Spartan soldiers regularly practiced maneuvering together in formation, relying on their greater discipline to keep ranks. Moreover, unlike the rest of the Greeks, their command structure included officers at much lower levels of organization, which made it easier for orders to be passed down the chain of command. The result was that Spartan phalanxes could accomplish what their enemies could not, wheeling and repositioning the formation on the field of battle, even with the enemy line bearing down on them. If this sort of maneuver was pulled off successfully and well-timed, it could potentially be a battle-winning tactic in itself. At the Battle of Nemea in 394 BC, the Spartans and their allies fought a coalition of Thebans, Athenians, Argives, and others. The Spartans, as always, took up the position of honor on the rightmost flank of their line. Both sides formed their phalanxes and advanced to battle, and as often happened, both lines drifted toward their right sides. The Spartan phalanx defeated the Athenian forces opposite them, and then, keeping good order, managed to wheel their formation of approximately 6,000 men to take the rest of the coalition forces in the flank. They rolled up the enemy line, inflicting nearly 3 times as many casualties as they themselves suffered. It was not the individual fighting prowess of the soldiers that allowed Sparta to become the dominant military power of their heyday, but the greater discipline, organization, and control they achieved. The result was a fearsome record of victories unmatched by any other Greek state. For a period of more than 150 years, no Spartan field army would be defeated in pitched battle, though there would be minor setbacks in small engagements and irregular warfare. In the end, Sparta's reputation for invincibility would be shattered by the Thebans at the battles of Tegira, Leuctra, and Second Mantinea. But by that time, the Spartan legend was fully formed. In over 2,000 years, no other soldier has been able to compete with the reputation of the Spartan hoplite for mastery of battle and complete, unwavering dedication to the warrior ethos.